Here's how to export your session stems for Mix Like a Pro. So one critical aspect of the mixing process is actually how to properly bounce your stems down to be ready for mix. So in the Mix Better course, we walk through the entire process, but I wanted to go through how I actually bounce down stems, either to send off to a mixer or to mix myself. So I have this project here that I'm preparing for mix, and as you can see, I kind of already have put things in order, and that's the first step of the process, is go through each instrument and make sure that it is in a particular order. Now, there is a general rule of thumb for how people tend to like their stems being sent, and that goes as follows. It's typically drums and percussion. Then I have some reverses and things. And then the next section down is bass. So in this case, I have electric bass and also synth bass, so anything like a low end, whether an actual instrument or a virtual instrument, all the bass elements. Then onto guitars. So in this case, we have a bunch of electric guitars and then acoustic guitars. After that, we have our piano effects, which there's a little reverse piano thing there that kind of feeds into the piano. So piano and then pads, which is kind of like the synth elements. I have a bunch of synth and keys elements as well. So that's kind of all after pianos, basically anything played with the piano or keyboard, followed by strings, and then some additional synths as well. And then I also have some impacts and some big percussion hits and things like that here. And then we're almost to the vocals. So kind of the bridge between the vocals and the synths for me is the vocal chop. So in this song, there's a kind of a vocal chop, and there's also a vocoder. Here is the lead vocal. Then I've got a couple of extra doubled vocals just in verse 2. Then I have the main double vocals, which is all the choruses and bridges. Keep going down, keep going down. We've got harmony vocals. Then we have a bunch of gang vocals that finish out the whole arrangement. So once you have things in order, then you can go in and color them like I did. Another thing that I do is a little bit of an extra step is as you're labeling, of course, you have to go through and label and know what your tracks are. And I like to do this as simply as possible, but typically it's going to arrange your tracks in the folder you send them to alphabetically. So if you put a number in front of the track in the order that you want it to be in, then you don't have to worry about the alphabetical order. So in this case, I have them numbered 1 through 63, and that way when I go to the folder, it'll all stay in this exact order, which will be really helpful, especially if you're working with a mixed template. You can drag and drop it right in. So then the next phase of this is actually the bouncing process. So as you can see here, I am going to choose the cycle range. So I did that by hitting Command A and then the letter U. I hit U. I hope it didn't hurt. So I know that this pad carries all the way through, so I'm going to select the pad, and then I'm just going to make sure that it starts correctly, which it does. And then just going to make sure that it ends where I want it to end, because once we select this cycle range, every file will be this long. So that fades out just the way I want it to. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on the very top track, hold shift, and then hold down arrow and highlight every track. And now that everything is highlighted, I'm just going to make everything a little smaller, a little bit more manageable. I'm going to go up here to File. Then I'm going to go down to Export, not Bounce. We want to export. So we have a few options here. We're going to do 63 tracks as audio files. Now this means that it's going to take all of our tracks, whether MIDI or audio, and it's going to bounce them down as audio, and that's just what we want. So now we're going to first select where we want the files to go. So you can send it to a folder that you've already made, which is what I've done. So this song is called It's a Miracle, so this is the It's a Miracle stems folder. So that's where I want it to go. Now we're going to go over here to the side menu and select how we want each file to bounce. So we're going to go here and customize how we want each file to bounce. So the range, we don't want to trim any of that silence. All we want to do is export the cycle range. And that's why we created the yellow bar, because that is what it will bounce. Every track will be the exact same length because it's all within the cycle range. So the next thing, of course, we want the save format to be in WAV. And then typically I like to bounce in 24-bit. 16-bit is the final file size that you'll bounce for upload. But if you do 24-bit, it's just a little bit bigger, a little bit more depth, and then we'll bounce it down, but we'll have that extra size and clarity as we're working in the mix. So now we can select to bypass effect plugins. So if you want to send the files either to yourself or to a mixer completely dry, you just have to select this button, and then it will pull off every plugin that you've placed during the production process. Kind of the way I like to do this is I actually like to pre-bounce some of my things. So as far as like the lead vocal, for example, I will take off the main effects like the reverbs and the any kind of, saturation. I might keep on a little bit of compression or something like that, but then I'll bounce it down within the file. That way I don't have to bypass those effects, and we're sending just the tuned and edited vocal. For instance, if you've gone through the hard work of melodyning your vocal and knowing how much time that takes. If you bypass effects, it's not going to keep your tuning. So you obviously want to keep that on. So you might have to do a little bit of extra work or pre-work, or realistically, you could bypass all effects and then go back in and just individually bounce a few sections. Like I like to do a dry and a wet version of guitar sometimes if it's a very ambient sound. That way the mixer, or whether myself or someone else, has the opportunity to kind of lean into exactly the way I had it, or they can kind of use it as a reference. So in this case, we're not going to bypass effects. Including audio tail will just mean that any kind of extra reverb, sends, or anything that happens, it's going to capture all that. So we're not going to click that. And then this is another big decision: include volume/panning automation. Typically, you're not going to select this because when you go into the mixing phase, you're going to want to start fresh. Even though you just worked on it and you might have done some panning, volume automation along the way, when it's time to mix, you want to kind of take that all from scratch. And so another side note, when I do the lead vocals, I actually typically will do some volume automation on the breaths and different things. So that's another reason why I like to bounce the lead vocals in place in the session before I actually do this export for mixing. That way I can kind of bake in the volume automations I've already done and also the tuning. So in this case, we're not going to click this button. That way it's not going to include any of that. Next thing down, normalize. This is could potentially change some of your sonic sounds. So I would turn that off. And then we're not going to select the add resulting files to the project browser. So then next thing down is we're going to actually, this is a really important one, is how the files will be named. So we want to do custom. So typically the way that I like to do this is I like to hit dash and then the track title. And then you can even go as far as typing in the BPM and then the key. Now this, obviously, if you are mixing your own music, you're going to know this information, but if you're going to send it off, it could be helpful to include that. That way they don't have to guess. And yes, it's going to say it a bunch of times, but it's all uniform. And then right below it, it's going to show you how it's going to show up. So the first track will be 1, kick out, It's a Miracle, BPM 68, key, C, and it's a wave. So that means every single file, because we went through the time to label each file correctly, it's going to show the title and it's going to keep everything nice and neat and clean. So then all we need to do is hit export. And now it's going to do its thing and it's going to bounce down every single file into the folder we selected. And it might take a minute, but that's how we can bounce down our files professionally, whether we're mixing to ourselves or we're sending it off to an engineer. And then all you need to do is go to the folder that you saved everything to and compress the file if you're going to email it off, if you're going to send it off, or you'll have the file to start and jump into your mix from scratch.